I'm going to jump up here to make this introduction because it's so important to me before Stan and Alex come up here. So for those of you who don't know Alex Karp and missed the 344% rise in his stock this year to date, it's worth paying attention to this guy and all that he is doing in the defense and intelligence communities. And I think this is probably, even if you're not a stock owner, one of the most important conversations, welcome Philippe, to have all of us listen to. And long before the stock went up 344% year to date, Stan Druckenmiller was his original investor. And we couldn't be more pleased that Stan also took the call to say, could you please make this conversation super interesting between the two of you? And I don't know which one should interview which, but hopefully it will be an unfettered and open conversation that goes wherever it goes. Stan, as all of you know, was one of the most successful investors actually of our time, 30% compounded returns at Soros, and just a legend beyond legends. And so we're so lucky to have him. But before they come up, I was able to secure 150 copies of Alex's book that doesn't come out until February. So we have bootleg copies. And it's about the technological republic, hard power, soft belief, and the future of the West. And he's going to go a little bit into this. But Mr. Isaacson said that it is one of the most important reads that we will have. And so I think it's important that we get an inside look. And some of your fellow Palantirians are here, Alex. I didn't know the word Palantirian until I discovered that they are both existing employees as well as former employees. And it is a cult. That is what this is all about. And it's a very important cult that is changing the shape of the world and controlling much of how the world order is going to happen. And so with that, I really, really appreciate both Stan and Alex joining us today. Welcome.
Thanks, Mary. That's quite an introduction. Well, hello, everybody. I'm Stan Druckenmiller. It's a true honor for me to interview this man today. I think he's one of the most consequential Americans running one of the most consequential companies in the world. You know, sometimes it's better to be lucky than smart. In 1976, my boss and mentor in Pittsburgh told me there was a man coming in the next day and that no one had ever heard of him, but this man was going to be a force and I should stay close to him the rest of my career. That was 48 years ago, and the next day I met Ken Langone. And for the first 15 years, it was kind of my little secret. Not many people knew Ken Langone. And then he became, I think, widely recognized as a national treasure. 15 years ago, Peter Thiel introduced me another man who most of you probably didn't hear of 15 years ago, Alex Karp. And maybe for the first 4 or 5 years, people didn't know much about Alex Karp. Again, I felt like I had a secret over most of the public, but I'm delighted that he now has become a national treasure and a recognized figure. And both these men are the same men that I met before they were famous. They have more moral clarity than anybody I've ever met. And Alex, as a United States citizen, we're so lucky to have you, and it's an honor to interview you today. So I do have a question for you, though. Palantirians, I think of a bunch of software engineers. You went to Haverford College, philosophy major, then you got a law degree, and you have a PhD in neoclassical theory, I think it's called, neoclassical social theory. I don't know what the hell that is, but it doesn't sound like a software engineer. So Peter Thiel has been amazing at picking leaders of companies. Why do you think he picked you, and can you just tell us about how it all happened in the beginning?
Well, first of all, it means a lot to be on stage with you, and I don't think Stan needs an introduction to this audience. But, I've really profited a lot in many ways from our many interactions, and there's the moral force that you are, and there's also the cognitive force and the kind of an outsider person who made it. I very much relate to you, and yeah, thank you. Yeah, I have no earthly clue why Peter picked me. I thought about this a lot. Peter and I were sparring partners and friends in law school. I hated every minute of law school. I thought, it's like moral sophistry in the service of prestige. And I understand both, but it's just not my thing. And I only finished because my grandfather was basically an immigrant, and I figured I couldn't really bring it. He passed away in my first year of law school, but I couldn't really bring telling him I was dropping out of school. But if I had to surmise, it's like Peter and I very much disagreed on the outcomes of the suppositions of our arguments, but we very much agreed on what it meant to make a strong argument and the suppositions that went into a strong argument and the level of rigor you needed to be plausibly even wrong. And we would battle over political. He was then more kind of, as now, or on the right, I was at the time a classic progressive. I still am, unfortunately. That part of America has been turned over to a pagan religion that is not intellectual and not liberal. And I think culturally, I was very honored when you asked me to speak, but I did say, just if you're asking me to speak,
you're not going to get it.
If you asked me to speak, then you asked me to speak. So you just have to. But I'm not saying anything I don't say in public. So, although I do think, my father's side of my family is Germanic Jewish, and Peter is German Huguenot. You're German. There was a cultural affinity. That's definitely true. And there are some very Germanic aspects of Palantir I could go into. But at the end of the day, I think all greatness is artistic. I think Peter is an artist in picking talent. I think if you asked him, he would give you an answer, but the real answer is he recognizes an artist when he sees an artist. And we've worked very effectively together. And by the way, it wasn't just no one else would have picked me to run anything. I mean, I might, but but I think there's picking and promoting and giving, operational authority to, all of which Peter has done. Very, very unusual. I would say our dialogue, one of the things that has made us, I don't know how many people follow our company. Maybe you should have followed us closer. But hopefully you didn't short us. But I wish you a merry holiday, even if you did. It won't be that merry. But I would say the rigor of our dialogues, where you can have, I'm not really trying to impose my opinion on him, and even though when we started the company there was a massive stature difference, it really was about having a very rigorous opinion that you could defend. And inside Palantir, there's lots of things about us, but I think the thing that's most special about us is the platform that changed the course of arc of history on terrorism was built by us. The platform that changed the arc of history on the battlefield, the first actual use of AI on the battlefield, the first actual and most impactful use of AI is not large language models, was built by us, Project Maven. The way in which software is managed on-prem will be managed by us. The most useful, most impactful by any standard in US comm commercial platform in the world, Foundry, was built by us. The platform that ended up being the only thing on the market useful for managing large language models is built by us. The view that large language models would be the management of the resource as opposed to the resource itself was heretical. Now everybody in the Valley wants to copy it. The way we organize almost every defense tech startup is an ex-Palantirian. I don't think you can even get investment in enterprise software at this point of any kind without an ex-Palantirian or trying to copy what we're doing. And the idea to organize, do a DPO and engage non-professional investors in essentially an army was, I'm proud of, organized by us and me. The death and pain that is brought to our enemies is mostly, not exclusively, brought by Palantir. The moral clarity term that to stand up for Israel when on October 8th was done in great part by us and some others, but we leaned into that. The battlefield using large language models, moving to small to large device is powered at the operating system by us. And it goes on and on and on and on. Like the best talent, organized talent in enterprise software in the world is bar none Palantir. And that's been true for 20 years. It's one thing to have a startup where you have the highest peak of parent of talent, but we're 20 years in, and if you ask any venture person, people who, whatever, some of them have liked me, don't like. Now, actually, I'm pretty popular, but and more aligned actually with the venture community because it's newly pro-American. And actually, I would say stood up when Israel was under massive assault, and it was popular to, especially in Europe where I spent half my life, blame all problems on the Jews. Our integration doesn't work. Our software industry doesn't work. Our tech industry doesn't work. But we can go to the International Criminal Court and pretend human rights abuses are happening where they're not. And complete, utter intellectual cringe level BS. Or, universities dedicate to themselves to being anti-prejudice, except for when it comes on and on and on. Very proud of these things. We're very, very allied with Western values. Even saying Western values are superior and obvious, I think it's just an obvious fact, but certainly it's an obvious fact if you're a religious, racial minority or you're non-male. That was somehow controversial. I think still is. I don't know why. Always been we're very pro-meritocracy. No one at Palantir cares where you went to school, who your parents is, what your background is. They're ex-Palantirians here. They will attest to, we've been saying the same thing for 20 years. Ran into Eric Poirier, he's here. He's like, man, you're saying it. Honestly, one of the weird things about Palantir is I am saying the same thing for the last 10, 20 years. But in any case, it's fresh and new now. Yeah, I don't know. That's a long-winded answer, non-answer to your question.
You answered it.
So.
Mary talked about Palantirians, a term I've heard for many years, being a cult. And the talent that you as someone has come out of there is astounding. What was your
A cult where I get no sexual benefits, by the way, just to be clear.
Thank you for that, Alex.
It's a rare cult with no sex and very little drugs, and we're not poisoning anyone, but yeah.
What was your, when I originally invested in Palantir, what I heard was some of the best talent, the engineers coming out of these schools, wanted to go to Palantir. That's always a good sign. What was your pitch? How did you get the kids? And then in the period where there was maybe a lull in perception about your company, you know, when you weren't public, the
oh yeah, when everybody
period,
was like, this is a bad death cult,
did
stealing my money, turning it into Karp lives on a commune. Yeah.
During
may
that
have heard
period,
these things
was
if
it
you're-
harder to acquire talent? And now with the resurgence and your rock star status, has it become much easier to acquire talent, or has it always been about the same? And what is the culture of a Palantirian, if you had to describe it?
Well, first of all, the talent, I think it is an indisputable fact we were the best and are the best talent acquisition. In fact, that was the only thing that anyone ever believed we were outliers at. You know, I mean, well, if you start with the founding team, it was Peter, me, Joe, Stephen, Nathan, and all of us called our smartest friends and said, we're going to change the world. I mean, we were maybe looked like hyperbolic. We were basically saying we're going to be the Palantir of today. In fact, we would send out these offer letters with, you could pick high cash or high equity, and high equity was we'd get to $20 billion, and people would get so angry. How are you never going to be $20 million? This is a total ripoff. And we called everyone, and I would say, and then I would say Joe, who's I think pretty famous now, Bob McGrew, who went on to be one of the founding fathers of large language models, and I were very, very focused on hiring. And you know, it was like, it compounded quickly, because if you're, you know, if you're being, Bob McGrew is one of the more talented people on the planet, and anyone who comes into his presence who's talented is like, wow, okay, I'm going to work with, you know, and then this went on and on. The second, you know, and then it went from one person to another, and there's so many funny stories. But Bob McGrew came to me one day. He's like, hey, Alex, I'm interviewing this guy, Ryan. Ryan is the smartest, maybe the smartest human being I've ever met. And he's like, Alex, what's it like to manage someone smarter than you? So that was the Palantir culture. I was like, you know, honestly, was not insulted by that. And then it was like very high mission, very high rigor, very low pay, very high equity. We lived together. It just was a really cool vibe, and there was nothing like it. It was like, and people who came into contact with it knew it. Now the outside venture world hated us, but on the inside, you know, it also reminded me a lot, like my parents were like this very unusual couple, and on the inside things were very happy, and on the outside everyone thought we were freaks, and that kind of made us even happier on the inside. Palantirians are truth-seeking, justice-seeking, fairness fanatics that are snobby justifiably about their intellect, but not based on where you went to school, or there's who push responsibility into their area of expertise and take over, and are addicted to that culture. The negative side of ex-Palantirians is they often don't want to work for anyone who didn't go to Palantir. That's a problem. Although they should just stay. And at the margin are unusual and difficult. And they're not convinced by orders. I mean, these platforms I mentioned, my success has been getting Palantirians to believe that my ideas are theirs. But there is no way, no Palantirian, I give like a real order. AIP, which is our thing I launched, there are very few things that they will not just follow orders. Now, if you develop a record of being if you have a track record of being right, especially where they thought they were wrong, I think in that way they would be classically good investors. The classic good investors I've dealt with are anomalously incredible investors like you. You know, if I tell you something and I come back to you 5 years later, especially if you thought it was stupid and I was right, that's impressive.
That's happened.
So, and that's how Palantirians are. It's like, yeah, that's really stupid. And then if you're right, then they listen to you. And we really struggle to get lateral hires. We have a couple, Mike Gallagher joined, that's working out, but you have no ability to tell someone what to do at Palantir until you've proven yourself on the battlefield. And I bring people into my office and let them prove themselves, but it's very low authority, very high. I decide for myself. I would say from a kind of military perspective, people make fun. It's very hard to get these consensus things to work, but once they work, people take on responsibility. And you know, you would not believe we're 3,600 people and the impact we have. It's only 3,600, and we're not planning to be 10,000 because organized correctly and honestly with AI leverage that we now have in our products and with AI, you can power whole industries with 100 people.
I had the privilege of reading the Technological Republic this weekend. Alex does not need the revenues with his stock at $73, but it's one of the most important books I've ever read. And I would urge everyone here, if you get the chance to read this book, it had a big impact on me. I learned a ton. And I'd like to delve a little bit into one of the big themes of the book. Silicon Valley, when it started out, there was a real mission alignment with the US government and our nation, with our defense industry, with our space industry. It led to things like GPS, ultimately the internet. And then somehow, over the years, that bond broke and the industry started becoming more interested in efficiency of advertising and very important consumer apps like Groupon tickets or things, as opposed to the original state. And it feels to me, though, like Alex, now that it's become clear that the next phase of national defense and dealing with our adversaries is software and AI, it feels like there's some momentum for the Valley to stop rejecting U.S. defense and work with the government potentially going forward, particularly some of the advisors to the new administration. How do you feel about this whole topic, and am I being overly optimistic that things are turning with regard to, I remember when Google employees forced them to reject working with the US government and so on. Where are we in that journey, and do you want to comment on this whole line of history?
Well, I mean, things have come a long way. Project Maven, which is the targeting apparatus of the U.S. government, was going to be powered by Google. My version of how it happened was somebody on the search team, is a little bit of a caricature, but raised their hand and said, "Well, if helping the U.S. government is part of my job, I'm going to leave." And then they were like, "Well, screw that," and they pulled out. And they pulled out at a particularly painful time. And AI was a complete joke at the time, but we thought it might not be a joke someday. And then we built. The DoD, by the way, has made a huge mistake, and I've told them this in private 1,000 times, but they should expose aspects of Project Maven to the U.S. population, not the parts that are obviously, but because one of the big issues we have in this society is obviously a legitimation crisis. We spend all this money on things and people perceive that none of it works. So, but at the time, it was viewed as insane and stupid to support the U.S. government or say anything pro-U.S. I do think it's changed quite a bit. I think it's changed for good reasons that you've elucidated. I support that, but also, quite frankly, because the Valley has realized you just cannot placate the anti-intellectual left. They'll destroy your business. And then I think that view was accelerated. By the way, I don't mean the progressive, like I view myself, and I think some people in the room probably, where you believe in fairness, meritocracy, inputs being even across society, you accept that the outputs will not be evenly distributed. The basic things that I think most sane people believe. But, so I think that got exacerbated, quite frankly, after October 7th. I think Silicon Valley has been the most rational in response to the heinous terror attacks, and where almost everyone in the Valley, even if they don't speak publicly, was very much on the side of defending the West, as defined the way I would define it. And I think that there's also the negative. We just can't partner with these people. They will destroy everything they touch, and there's no rational conversation. But then on the positive side, I think a couple of things have happened. Like one, whatever, venture community, bless their souls, it's a financial community, and Palantir's valuation does change things. It's like, people are like, wow, I can make a lot of money at that, and it is much harder than it looks, but it is getting easier every day because of reforms and because of the level of talent that is coming in to fix our government. I'm very supportive of this. I am much more optimistic than most people that there will be at least some modicum of change. It is true in DC, there's kind of a view that it won't make a difference. I think people, just as a construct, we were managing software and software systems 10 years ago where the incremental lift was just nothing. But it is now so big that you just have to get pockets where you succeed and it will metastasize. And I do think Elon and others will succeed at that. And then I think our society is just crying for things that work. People are really disgusted with, my version of it, the instruments of measurement have been corroded everywhere. It's like, pick your favorite instrument of measurement. It's been corroded and politicized and then does not work. And Western societies are tired of this. And everyone is, pretty much across our whole society, is just sick of, but wait a minute, my school isn't a school, my border isn't a border, my United Nations is not the United Nations, my government is doing X, Y, and Z, but it's all inflows, there's no outflow. And then the other side is worn out. Like the side, again, I've been a classic kind of progressive. I would probably have to be an independent now. But it's like the alternative is what? Like things that obviously don't work. Like no one believes they're ever going to work. But many people have been too scared to say, hey, but that doesn't work. But eventually, I think there's just a tiredness with this. So and then we have really ruthless, cunning, long-term thinking adversaries. So it's not like you get a chance to rest. These things will be pen tested. And you see, yeah. So and then there's labs. Like you see, everyone in military tech saw what happened in Ukraine, what worked. Everyone saw what happened and what worked in Israel. And then there's U.S. commercial, which is the most dynamic, interesting. Things are just blossoming.
So, Alex, there's an editorial in the Wall Street Journal this morning lamenting the fact that an extra, I can't remember, 35 or 40 billion has been taken out of the defense budget that would have been put in. There's all this excitement about DOGE. In regard to defense, is the issue cutting programs, reducing costs, or is it allocation of resources? In your book, you talk about the F-35 costing $2 trillion, and that's how that's not going to be the important way to fight our adversaries in 15 or 20 years. So is it more important to reallocate to dominance in software and AI, or
Well, look,
or is
I
it
mean,
an actual
nobody in
budget
tech
issue?
believes spend and output are any way correlated except for inverse. So, like, obviously, you begin with how do we spend less and get more? And I mean, it's very self-serving for me to want that because that's going to be a bonanza for Palantir. But, you know, it's also true. You know, it's like we need things like, you know, you look at what's happening in Israel, Ukraine, or in general, ask the simple business question, where do I have an advantage where adversaries are bad? Like, we're the world's best at software and the world's best at AI, and we're fighting with hardware, which, of course, there's some amount of hardware we need. But then if you look at the battlefield in Ukraine, like, you know, with jamming devices that are now everywhere on the battlefield, a lot of that hardware is hard to deploy. So you have to deploy basically software-controlled mini hardware devices with payloads. And that's all software plus large language models plus smart people plus drones. Now, that doesn't mean the totality of our budget has to go there tomorrow, but it does mean that that's where, and also, then you get to the ethical dimension. When you're putting someone on, a human being or thousands of human beings on a hardware device, you're presupposing that they may die. Well, what if you know they're going to die? How do you deploy it? It's like, so a lot of this stuff also, you could even forget the finance, just look at it from the more, our ability to scare our enemy is obviously less if we're hampered by our own morality, which is like, of course, Americans are not going to allow 10,000 people to die on the battlefield as easily as our adversaries. What if it's not 10,000 adversaries? What if it's 10,000 drones powered by Palantir? So and that's something we happen to be the best at. So there's the moral side of it, which is we do not, you know, we're at parity technologically, but we're not at parity morally because Russia, Iran, China do not think about human life the way we do. And then you get to the cost and the legitimacy of it, which is, you know, but I'll give you a different, slightly more philosophical riff. I would encourage everyone to think about a trend, which I'm bad at articulating, which is, in general, technology in pre-kind of software as an enterprise where you're supplying parasitic technologies to enterprises that pay you because they have to and they don't like you. And consumer internet, which is a similar form of parasitic, you are the host and you get slower and dumber, but the person running it gets richer and smarter. That we're in a different phase now where institutions are essentially becoming essentialist, which means they're actually going back to what is the institution. I think one of the reasons why Trump has been so successful is, it's on the back of a philosophical movement, which is that the industry actually has to go back to, I build tractors. What is the cost of the tractor? You're not in the industry of building tractors to hire a software company that has a higher multiple. You've got to make your tractor company or your drone company or your military. The purpose of a military is to scare the adversary and make your troops safer. But then you have this massive institution, and it's like, well, is the purpose of the military to do that, or is it to create revenue for every state? Is the purpose of the military to build technologies of the past that have, and then you have this huge problem that is very hard to solve, especially for Western Europe, which is the primary purpose of many Western European defense budgets is to provide their citizens with income. But that's not the purpose of a military. But that is the purpose functionally of many of their military purchases. So we're regressing, or in my view, going forward to every single institution is going to have to say, this is my purpose, this is what we spent, this is the output, and the output has to be greater than the input. And that sounds simple, but it's very hard to do at scale. And it was not possible to do at scale, but it is now. And because it's possible, people are yearning for it. And where you see people do this, I mean, look at Israel's success on the battlefield. That's part of the reason. It's like, because they're not conflicted. It's like, our job is to win on the battlefield while maintaining our own ethical standards. Look at the impact.
So it sounds like Ukraine was an aha moment of something you had figured out 10 or 15 years ago for the US government. Has that accelerated your business? Like, have we crossed that Rubicon where the legacy stuff?
I mean, figuring out what the rate of acceleration is I'll leave to greater minds. But I think the interesting thing about it is, to your point, 10 years ago, these were like, get me out of the office kind of discussions. And in like, I would meet people quite literally in like the sub-basement, double-level basement of the wrong building because you weren't allowed to be seen with us, literally.
Our offices weren't that bad.
Yeah, well, yeah, but so it's now moved to, we know this is true, or we believe this will be true. How can we implement it, and what are the hurdles to stopping us from doing it?
It's interesting because there's this debate going on about the safety of AI. But if we have this big advantage of AI in AI on the battlefield, and we need to have a big advantage because they don't have the moral restrictions we have, it kind of makes a little bit absurd about this safety argument, because China and Russia and Iran and our other adversaries, they're not going to slow down AI because of fears. And if we let them catch us, aren't we screwed?
Well, I'll give you, I'm not here to push my book, although I probably, somebody here, okay, well, thank you. But
I'm here to push your book, but I'm not trying to make you rich. I'm telling you, this is an important book.
Well, I appreciate every dollar, Stan. I really do. One of I did my PhD at the University of Frankfurt on, and I sat basically I had this job where I was like basically the classical immigrant. I wrote papers, I did all the work, and I got no credit, which I was very happy. But and so one of the things I came to believe that is the genesis of a lot of the ideas in the book is we always believe that our ideas of democracy were accepted in, say, Germany. And I obviously have a high opinion of Western Europe and Germany, and particularly. But my interactions with people in Germany, especially people who are older and in the countryside who were very, very was much more like, all this stuff seems crazy, we didn't believe it, but it did lead to a higher standard of living, and therefore we adopted it. As opposed to, we adopted it because it's obviously morally right. And I think those people have had deep insight into how the human mind works, and so you have to deliver benefits, and you could think of the wonders of our Constitution as obviously correct, and I kind of see it that way. But I think from the outside perspective, it's much more like a backdrop protection against a regression into non-working things. The positive thing was not the American spirit or Constitution to them, but it was our standard of living was better, our quality of living was better, we didn't have wars, people were happier and wealthier. And then I tend to think a lot of these things come down to, if you want to make people believe in whatever you want to, like constitutional order, that constitutional order had better deliver value. And I would say, and I'll get to the AI thing, that one of my biggest criticisms of the elite educational institutions I went to is it at best is a dogma, but if you're not delivering a country that's safe, where there's a future that could be better than the past, that could even define itself as a country, where basic things like being legal or illegal are viewed as taboo subjects, don't be surprised when people get off the ship and say, I'm not into this. And that will happen here, it will happen everywhere. And then the AI version of it, I would say, is, first of all, on the military side, we have no choice. We cannot slow down. Our adversaries are not going to slow down, and we have an advantage. And they'll laugh all the way to dominance. And the dominance that they'll impose, we will not like. It's because we got people to adopt the American way, broadly speaking, because we were exporting well-being and we had the bomb. And so like AI will allow us to raise the GDP of America dramatically and help our allies do it while essentially creating the functional equivalent of the nuclear bomb before our adversaries. And then you do have an issue of how to regulate it, and that's a very complicated issue. My version of it, it should be thresholded with like teeth that kick in depending at the level of like the closer you get to AGI. And honestly, I don't think China, Russia, or anyone want complete AGI. And then you have the issue, of course, of like who's running these companies, and do you trust them? Because a lot of these technologies are quite dangerous, even what we're doing. And like, if the person has a history of being completely untrustworthy, maybe that's a problem, or not aligned with America. And those are very hard questions. I don't have an answer for it, because none of us want government intervention, partly because we haven't seen a record of those people being competent enough on technical decisions, and because of rampant politicization of every issue, but there's still going to be very big issues.
I realize you're a technologist, but given the seat you're in, I can't help but ask, just looking around the world at the hotspots, do you see potential for upside in the Middle East? We've all been looking at the downside there for the last 30 or 40 years and terrified of it. I think we can all still see it's a hotbed, and we can see things that go wrong. Is there some glimmer of hope in what I've been seeing the last year that things could actually go right there?
Well, I'm, for people who don't know, viewed as ridiculously pro-Israel, and I'm proud of that.
I think everyone knows that by now.
But I do think the fact it's been a long time since a Western government won a war dramatically, and like we need to take heed of like, well, how did they win? Why did they win? And what does it mean? And it's really funny because I spent a lot of my life. We have very large clients in the Arab-speaking world, and I built that business. And you learn a lot. Especially, I dealt with very powerful people and very non-powerful people, and winning is what people care about over there. Like, I never ever told people. In fact, I was always very open about, look, I'm pro-Israel. And certainly in private, people liked that, especially when they appreciated the honesty. It means a lot to the forces of good over there that Israel is doing very well. And I could see a very diminished Iran. I mean, they're already very diminished. And like you basically have the impression there that every smart person is working for Israel. It's a good thing. They're smart. So, and then the thing we've got to get past. When we get, whether it's the Bush version of they're going to be Wilsonian Democrats or the Obama version that the Persian mullahs love us, we just have to move past this stuff. The Middle East, people in the Middle East understand and manage that region a lot better than we do. And I could see if we're willing to, we have to focus on our own morality at home, but it's barely working here. I don't think we should be exporting all of our standards, and they really have an idea how. So if we can get past that stuff, and we might see a lot of goodness. I'm very long the U.S., and I could see that region doing much better than people expect. And certainly, I think they're hopeful.
It's funny, when I was over there, I got the feeling that every Gulf state was rooting for Israel, with the possible exception of Qatar. My guess is they're falling into line now that they say who's winning.
I mean, if you, one of the coolest things about my business is I deal with important and unimportant people, or the unimportant people being very important for what they're doing. But, I've spent a lot of time in the Arab Middle East, and like, obviously they're, varying of opinions, but they very much were rooting for Israel to win. And, but I think it's important also for just the West in general. And if you look at, who is like, spends every waking moment trying to explain to the world why they're bad, they're largely, as a proxy indicator, I don't mean one-to-one, people doing that are mostly running failed institutions in failed countries. And the Arab Middle East is not interested in that kind of failure. They're run by competent people that want success for their country. They're not interested in being told they're morally superior from the Berkeley or Yale faculty while running an institution that barely works, that's subsidized by it still doesn't work, despite the fact it's tax exempt and subsidized by the US government. And yeah, so it's like they're just not interested in that. And by the way, they think people who talk like that are dumb, which is like which is why we have a successful business there, the product, plus, they're not interested in they're very smart people.
All I know is one of the monsters of human history just got defeated. Talk about Mr. Assad. And I think we all know the reason.
But there's the Middle East version, and then it is very important that people who are smart and have integrity and are willing to fight win. And, it's like, and as a parting note, it's super important to stand up. It starts with footsie, pagan religion, protesting in front of everything where people are just trying to go to school or protesting against Israel or not having an interest in defending the U.S. And it ends with people justifying murdering CEOs. They're completely linked. And that's why you just have to stand up and fight this stuff. And at every turn. And when people are asking you to give money, it's like they're playing footsie with our destruction. And there is no alternative to America in the world. It's like it is the only thing that works at this scale. It's the only place where people actually are meritocratic and fair. It's the only place where they don't steal your capital after you make it in general. It's the only place, if you want to take classic progressive lines, where we integrate people from all backgrounds and do it gleefully. There's only one place like this, and the people who they begin with one issue and that metastasizes to. I mean, if you look at people on TV, whatever you think about our healthcare system, you have people on TV joyously partying. The guy was assassinated on these streets. And these people aren't screwing around, and we shouldn't either.
How are we doing on time, Mary?
I have no idea.
I think we're out of time.
I think we're over time, but I just want to make sure if there's not one or two things that the audience wants to ask or say.
Question from the audience? Yes, sir.
I am. Alex, Ronnie Matei from TrueMid. Peter was my first external investor as well, so I've been following you for quite some time. Can you talk about your view on the evolution of the military, not over the next 15 to 20 years, but over the next 3 to 5 years? I'd love to hear, with so many conflicts in the world going on and with what you've empowered our army and our defense, like what happens over the next 3 to 5 years, away from the much longer term picture?
Well, if you look at what happened in Ukraine, basically the Russians integrated jamming devices, and it went from a classic hardware large object war to a small object war powered by software with very quick iterations, where the products that were, especially the hardware products that were useful last week, aren't useful this week. And that's just going to go across every institution of defense in the world. So you're going to move from large to small, hardware to software. Hardware is going to become powered more by, in the American context, you're going to have to start showing the software works, that the hardware works. And this is going to just accelerate. And that's going to happen over the next 18 months, I think. Some of it depends on what level of threat there is. But
How does the Army, how do all the joint forces do that without the technology community side by side with them, unless they're recruiting all the technologists to quickly enter?
Well, there's going to be some of that. But I mean, the short answer is yes, they're going to have to do that. But then productized. Things have to be productized. So if a piece of software is productized, the final mile does not have to be done by somebody who's hugely technical. It can be done by, our product is used by people who are smart with high school degrees and people who went to MIT. It really comes down to how good is the product before it's installed. And you can productize a lot of things that in the past were required technical talent, meaning you can sell it to 100 people. A lot of the things they need exist in the commercial community or already exist on the battlefield. Quite frankly, a big issue for the US military and other militaries is just buying the stuff they know that works instead of the stuff that they know doesn't work. So a lot of it's just contractual. They're very basic things that would transform America. Like there's something called a commercial preference, meaning, it's obvious to any commercial entity. I offer you a cup, and this is sold at Walmart for $1. He offers you a cup, and it's hand built here, and it's built for $1,000. Well, but without a commercial preference, you might be buying this in the U.S. government. And so a lot of it comes down to, I'm running around Congress all the time saying, move the budget to, now I say more, but at the beginning I was like, we need 1%, 0.2% of the U.S. budget goes to AI, defense budget, 0.2%. And if you said, what percent goes to products that are software that have been used on the battlefield effectively, i.e. third-party validation, and or have been sold commercially, it's probably in the 2% range. And so that has to change to like 20%. And these things will, they are going to change. The weird thing that's happening now is when you talk to senators, congressmen, generals, everyone is saying the same thing. And then to your point, you do have an influx of people that want to help the US government who are very technical, but it's a combination of pressure from the top internally, pressure from our adversaries, budgetary pressure, and productization. And there is a huge difference now, again, with these, I'm not trying here to sell my product, but what would have taken us, we had this deployment with a very large retail company, and we did the same thing 2 years ago. It took us 6 months. Now, and there was a lot of lift for the customer, but not enough to really force the CEO to engage. Now it took 6 days. These things are like, it's like you can take large language models. So large language models, as you may have noticed, are a science experiment for you that you're paying for because if you have a board, they've told you it's important. But you can actually manage them so that they're lethal in targeting. Like, where does the drone go? How does the drone get there? Who does the drone kill? Like, for example, if you're Ukrainian, you want to kill the smart, unpopular general, not the idiot, popular general, right? So there's a lot of thought goes into taking people out. Do you kill the person near a hospital? Do you kill them near a school? Is someone in the car? Especially U.S. targeting, there's a lot of ethics embedded into how this happens. And that's complicated technically because, say, you guys are a car and you are the terrorists we're going after, but actually your phone is compromised, and because of your phone, we know everything is happening. But that can't go into the overt targeting package because most people in the room don't know your phone is compromised. It's a very complex technical thing, but you can do the lower end version, which is what the Ukrainians did, they set this up within weeks. And that stuff, then it actually, the other thing the Ukrainians have done, which is not sensitive, but there's something in software called branching, which means you can do things in different parts of the software without sharing them. So let's say you think of an investment idea. Stan's managing 5 people. One of them is really the best at making a lot of money, but also the best at losing it. So how do you control where they experiment, how much they invest, what rights they have to invest, what rights they have to not invest, what is the asset class they could invest in, what asset class can they not invest in, does it have to get authorization from Stan? This is exactly what happens on the battlefield. But if you have branching technology like that, you can also inverse it. So let's just say you think your general is an idiot and you actually know what's going on, and you're technical and they're not. You can often get battle plans to work that maybe they wouldn't have exactly understood. So these things actually are available, and I think because they're available now in a way they weren't, they get adopted, because it used to be in the past it was super. I mean, what happened was everybody in government and sometimes in companies would say, sure, we'll do that, but the bureaucracy could slow you down to the point where it wasn't clear the alpha was great enough for your engagement. But now It's just the alpha is great enough so that it will overwhelm you. And you just need less technical talent also because the large language models allow you to augment the technical talent of the people you have who are not technical and retain their knowledge, which tends to be a big issue in U.S. fighting and in general U.S. government and companies because you have U.S. that has a transient workforce, unlike, say, Germany and Japan. So managing a transient workforce is difficult where you have technical specializations.
Thank you. Alex, thanks for helping the good guys win. I hope you make a lot of more good guys win in the future.
And thanks for helping me.
Appreciate it.